Good evening. Tonight I am talking about two instruments. You can probably guess one of them is the euphonium and the second is the baritone. There is a lot of confusion about the differences between the baritone and the euphonium. Some people say the baritone has 3 valves whilst the euphonium has 3 at the top and a 4th valve on the side, so 3 valves, 4 valves. Some people say that this is from one member of a family and this is from another, that this is the easy version, this is the hard version, and so forth. A lot of that is just twaddle. So in this video we're going to talk a little bit about these two instruments and hopefully you might learn something. So we'll start first with the baritone. It is an instrument pitched in the key of B flat, the same as a tenor trombone. This particular instance is a Besson 700 series and is quite a nice instrument. Besson is one of the standards in brass band manufacture, or at least it has been, and they produce good solid instruments. The baritone is very useful in the brass band for blending in. It's a harmony style instrument. It doesn't very often play the melody. In fact, it very rarely plays the melody. And if you were to split the band in two between basses and upper parts of the band, the baritone joins in the upper parts of the band. It plays a lot of the third part, so the tenor parts. Despite being called a baritone, it plays the tenor part in the brass band. So here we have the euphonium. The euphonium is very similar to the baritone, firstly in appearance. They look quite similar, but they both, believe it or not, have the exact same length of tubing. The distance from the start to the end of this instrument is exactly the same to the distance between the equivalent points on the baritone. What makes them look substantially different is that the euphonium's tubing starts a little bit bigger, but it gradually gets wider and wider throughout the whole length of the instrument, and so therefore is more conical. Whereas on the baritone, the tubing does get a little bit bigger as it goes through the instrument, but it doesn't, not to the same degree as what you get on the euphonium. Some of the characteristics of that difference mean that this takes a lot more air to play and produces a much fuller sound than what the baritone does. Both of these instruments come in 3-valve and 4-valve varieties as standard. The valves can either be on the top here, as you see. Yamaha in particular would have 4 valves up the top, the 4th valve being played by your pinky instead of your 4th valve being played by the other hand. But as I said, both instruments come in 3 and 4 valve varieties, and so if you ever hear somebody say baritone has 3 valves, euphonium has 4 valves, whilst in many cases that is true, you cannot use that as a way to define whether an instrument is a euphonium or a baritone. Now in the brass band we have these two very specific instruments, and it's quite easy when you're accustomed to them to tell them apart. They look quite a bit different despite being built on the same principles. But in other walks of life, euphoniums can sort of fit, and euphoniums and baritones can sort of fit anywhere along a spectrum between being cylindrical like this or being more conical like this. And so when you get other instruments, orchestral baritones or things of that ilk, how do you say which one they are? And that's a bit of a dilemma, because I've got a baritone at home, for instance, which has characteristics of both of these. It's not as cylindrical as this baritone, but it's not as conical as this euphonium. So I understand why there is quite a bit of difficulty and a bit of confusion between these two instruments. As far as this video goes, however, I shall give you a bit of a demonstration of the sound of the baritone comparing to the sound of the euphonium. I'm in a slightly bigger environment now, so I hope that the sound projects a little bit more effectively and that you guys get a sense of the difference that there are, because the differences is number one, based on the sound. The sound is different, but the resonance of the sound, the way that the sound uses the environment that it is in, is quite different between these two. And now that same passage on the euphonium. In the brass band, the euphonium is usually the instrument that has, and very similar to the solo cornet, the most technically demanding music. I've got with me just some music that I've pulled out of our band library. This is the euphonium part, this is the baritone part. Don't expect you to see that on this recording, but what I shall do, well, that one looks quite exciting. What I shall do is demonstrate in a real-world example of the differences between what a baritone is expected to do and what a euphonium is expected to do. So I'm going to use the march Cairo Red Shield, which is a brilliant march, and if you search for that on YouTube, you will like it. And I shall play the opening just a few bars or so on the euphonium, and then I shall play the I shall play the baritone part, just so you can get a demonstration of how these instruments are used. And now the baritone part. One thing you can tell from that excerpt is that the baritone plays a very traditional role. It sits in that four-part soprano, alto, tenor, bass as the tenor instrument. Even though it's called a baritone, it plays that tenor role, as I said before. And as you can tell by that excerpt, it is doing its job. The euphonium, however, doesn't fit precisely in that four-part model. It's not a soprano, it's not a tenor, alto, it's not a tenor, it's not a bass instrument. It has the characteristics of several of those categories, but it doesn't fit nice and cleanly into one of them. So when we're talking of a four-part model in the brass band, we put the euphonium as a fifth part. It is its own category. It frequently plays elements of the melody. It frequently plays elements of counter melody. It frequently doubles an octave higher what the bass section are doing, and sometimes it just does its own thing. If you were to get a hymn tune or something like that, you would have your standard four parts, and then you'd have the euphonium often adding in little twiddly parts or counter melodies or just phrases that don't fit anywhere else. And so it is quite unique for that reason. So anyway, this video has been a little bit of a rambling one. It's been completely unscripted, as are all of my videos. So I hope that you've learned something. And if there's anything else that you want me to describe or demonstrate about these instruments, I would be only too happy to oblige. Thanks for watching.